So, the first draft of this video essay, retrospective, etc., was 1,400 words long. Um, and then I edited down a little bit shorter. It's still like 1,280 words long. So, at the beginning of my recording here, I don't really know how long it's going to be. But I'm sorry about that, one and two. Season 3 I think warrants having a lot to talk about, and I 100% think that if I did the season 4 video after this one, season 4 would be even longer, but we'll do as we do. Anyways, hi, my name is David. I make videos analyzing media and stories that I like to talk about. Obviously this is my season 3 uh, retrospective thoughts and ideas, talking about the season 3 and overall like the arcs and stuff like that. I look at season 3 as like the most popular season. I've seen so many people talk about it. My friend got me into it when she was in season 3, and so season 3 to me is a very popular season because of the things that happened there. And from what I've seen and the general consensus of the fandom is that season 3 is like peak, and then some people have mixed feelings about season 4, which I just agree with. I think it's the best season. And then season 5 is like very different. But season 3 is really when like the story picks up its stride and does a lot. And it does a lot. I'll talk about it later, but like compared to season 1 and 2, these 40 episodes in this one season, so chocked full of stuff. In my season 1 and 2 videos, I tried to mention almost all of the episodes, just in passing mention, even if it was just like one line. And there are some episodes that I wasn't able to get to. In this, I believe I only don't talk about like one or two episodes, because every single episode is like truly important. So yeah, I wanted to talk about like my sort of like analysis of the season, what it does, how it like continues, and like this is the last video of this like whole series that I've been doing, which is just talking about the seasons of the Magnus Archives, which is a horror podcast written by Jonathan Sims, directed by Alexander J. Newell, produced by the Rusty Quill Company. Heavy spoiler alerts, because this I kind of balance talking about the season as if I was first reading it, first listening to it, and also seeing it in the full context of the entire 5 seasons. So it kind of flips back and forth between those different perspectives. And I honestly didn't really focus on like perspective of first time watcher as much, and more just analyzing arcs and stuff like that as they go. And so just full spoiler alert for the entirety of the Magnus Archive seasons 1 through 5. I might bamf about Magnus Protocol too. I don't suspect myself to be doing that, but I might. And yeah, I don't know how long it's gonna be. So thank you for coming on this ride. If you want to, at some point, I have an inkling that my microphone might die. So if that happens, I'm very sorry. I forgot to charge the microphone. I don't know how to check the charge of it, but it's whatever. It's fine. And overall, this season, I do enjoy this season a lot. And writing about it was such an exhilarating like feeling, because of the things that like happened this season. And obviously, I'll talk about it. So what I'm going to be doing is more or less talking about the arcs of the characters, the arcs of the plot, and the important things that happen, very important moments. And I know there's going to be some stuff that I'm going to forget, but it's just a lot. So let's get into it.
Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, Head Archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins.
This season is very hard to talk about. This season is when Magnus Archives decides to blossom, to slowly grow from an anthology series to a true branching off story. The first 2 seasons were like a meld of both of them, and the anthology stories took the front road, front seat. They took center stage. This season continues to have these anthology stories, sort of like small snippets of horror that happened in the past. But now most of these stories are tools for the characters to learn because of the things that people have experienced in the past, the people they've met, the monsters they've encountered. John, our protagonist, voiced by Jonathan Sims, Johnny Sims, learns about the world and acts upon information he gains from these statements. And nearly every single episode in this season delivers story, whether from the statements or otherwise, like outside the statement. In the first two seasons, there were some episodes that was just not intertwined with the current plot at all. But now that present day current story takes center stage. Alongside that, we also begin seeing branching POVs, points of view. Before, it was just John himself. Maybe sometimes someone else comes in and he's talking with them, interviewing with them, like statement givers, or people in the institute talking to John. The only moments in the past seasons where John was not present for recording were like in the finales. Specifically, for example, Sasha and Elias in the Prentice Attack when she goes to like tell Elias, hey, turn on the fire extinguisher or whatever. And Martin and Tim in the season 2 finale when they encounter Michael the Distortion. But throughout it all, it's always been John. It's John's story, and he's been reading or listening to statements and investigating. Now, this season, the story expands to not only John, but to the other characters as well. There are some episodes where John doesn't even appear, and it's just in someone else's point of view. And that's a big change from the last two seasons, obviously. The story begins to swirl around our characters, like a blending, a mix of them. Moving the story from a catalog of horror that John reads to a story that begins to juggle so many different aspects. And there's so much happening in this season, more than any other seasons. Like season 4 does narrow it down to just John and Martin with like small bursts of action with other people and other characters. And season 5 follows the dread train of the apocalypse, and season 1 and 2 just John and his investigations and the consequences of such. But season 3 not only responds from the ripples caused from Princess's attack and Jürgen Leitner's death, but also introduces a ticking clock, huge stakes, and personal complications. And there is so much happening, which is why this video is going to be so long, I think, maybe. With the foresight of now, I would have wanted to wait to talk about season 4 after this video to cement exactly how season 3 changes the game, changes the story, and makes the Magnus Archives an amazing story as we continue season 4 and 5. But that's done now, and I can't do that. I'll probably remake season 4 when I have better like video skills, but that's going to be in some time in the future. I got to move on to other stuff. Either way, season 3 takes all the work into the first 2 seasons and concentrates it towards an amazing high point for the story, a bombastic climax that leaves John's story changed for the worse or the better, depending on who you are and your point of view. We begin season 3 with 2 episodes that sort of establish the current state of the story after the finale of season 2 with the death of Jürgen Leitner and the discovery of Jürgen Leitner's dead body. In 81 It Gets from Mr. Spider, John contemplates on like a recorder how he got to this point, how he got to what he's been doing for the past 2 seasons. And he talks about learning about Jürgen Leitner and like his own scholarly ambitions, which all like stemmed from an encounter with John's first Leitner, which was a children's book named A Guest from Mr. Spider. A younger John finds it and almost dies from it, but as he's reading it. But a young bully interrupts him and steals the book and reads the book himself, and he ends up being killed instead by Mr. Spider. And John names this moment as the thing, the event, the inciting incident, maybe, that got him interested in the supernatural in the first place. He thinks about his resolve that when he was younger, about wanting to learn more, so that he could in some way avenge the boy that literally saved his life in sacrifice of his own. He thinks about not Sasha and what she said about the Unknowing, and also about Elias killing Gertrude, maybe, and also maybe Leitner. I'm pretty unsure about that. And he sort of like resolves that he needs allies, he needs friends, because in the first, and well, most mainly in the second season, he was alienating himself from everyone. He like told Tim and Martin like, "Hey, leave. I don't want to get you sick." When he was trying to kill not Sasha, and he just didn't confide in anybody when things were happening, and he needs to now. He at this moment he does despair because of the situation at hand. Quote, "I need help. I need allies. I just wish this revelation didn't come just as everyone is convinced I'm a deranged killer." Because they found Jurgen Leitner's dead body in his office. This episode 81, is also when we meet Georgie Barker, voiced by Sasha Sienna, who is Johnny Sims' in real life wife, who has now housed John in her apartment. I don't really get into it like in the, because they didn't really talk about it this season, and I didn't write about it. But they used to date. They used to date in high school. Yeah, they talk about it in the season, but I didn't write it down. They did. They dated. They dated. Yeah. Then they broke up. Georgie makes a podcast called What the Ghost, and the Rusty Quill production team did produce 2 episodes of Georgie Barker's What the Ghost in real life, IRL, that are kind of fun, kind of, they are so disconnected from everything around. It's just Sasha Sienna as Georgie Barker reading out about, one was what was the dancing plague, I believe. It was like people dancing a lot. And the other one I did not really pay attention to because I was busy doing something. I don't remember what, but I was not paying attention to it. But I know it was funny because there's moments where she gets exasperated about all the ad reads she has to do. And they mention ad reads in some episodes in this season, but and her is expiration about it. And so they really highlight that in those 2 episodes. So go check those out. Those are really fun. Anyways, she believes John to have been fired and needing a place to stay while he finds his way. Obviously, Georgie knows he's in trouble and knows that everything he's saying is just BS, but she cares enough for him to not question it, to help him out anyways. Georgie here then now becomes a reoccurring character and is also a very important player in the coming seasons, mainly season 4 and 5. She doesn't get as much screen time, quote unquote, in this season, beyond, like, we only ever see her in the apartment, but we'll see a lot more of her in season 4 and 5. But here we're starting to establish Georgie Barker a lot more. So 81 establishes that John's on the run, and the police believe he killed Jurgen Leitner, some random guy that they found in his office. They just can't identify him. Gertrude Robinson, who's been dead, whose body's been found, and probably Sasha James, who disappeared around the same time as Jurgen Leitner's murder. So John's in some trouble. In episode 82, Eyewitnesses, Section Officer Daisy Tonner, who's returning from episode 61, Hard Shoulder, voiced by Faye Roberts, interrogates the employees of the Magnus Institute. First, she speaks with Martin, voiced by Alexander Januel, and she threatens him to produce John while she pin it on Martin himself, saying she has, quote, full operational discretion to make this whole situation go away. And she pushes when he says he doesn't know, and says that John was closest with Martin, which he seems like embarrassingly happy about. He's like, who said that? Who said that? I mean, no, I wouldn't say we're not close, but we are close, you know? Very, very cutesy little moment. She realizes she's not going to get anything from him, so she sends him away and gets Tim to come in, and their quick conversation boils down to, if Tim knew where John was, he'd say as much, because he does not like John, and he thinks that like John's been doing bad stuff. And also, Tim himself has very suppressed grief over the disappearance of Sasha. He's in denial about seeing the not Sasha and thinking it was Sasha, but he's like, that cannot be Sasha, because Sasha is a person and not a monster, and he's in denial about that. He knows it, but he just doesn't want to think about it. Both Martin and Tim were hurt by John's investigations in season 2 when he suspected them and the other people in the Institute of murdering Gertrude. And along with these supernatural occurrences in the Institute, both of them have taken different stances in regards to John himself, and they will continue to diverge as we progress through the story. Martin doubles down on his loyalty to John, caring for John more than the others, and Tim begins to distance himself, angry with his friend disappearing and his bosses hiding stuff from him. And we will see both of these two characters begin to grow and degrade through this sort of path. In this episode, we also have Elias being interrogated by Daisy, and Elias tries to make her leave, and she asks if he knows where John is, and he says, "Yes, I do, but I'm not going to tell you." And Daisy threatens him like she did Martin, and he threatens back by telling her of a past event in her life about how she killed a man named Calvin Benchley for like a childhood accident, and threatens to reveal it to her supervisors if she doesn't leave. He says, quote, "I'll make sure your superiors know all about every nasty little thing you've done in the name of peace and order, and I'll make sure they are subject to the scrutiny they so desperately want to avoid. More importantly, I'll make sure they know it has all been exposed because of you." Daisy promptly leaves. Here we begin to see Elias beginning to flex his powers. Before this, we had no inkling whatsoever that Elias was anything but like an eccentric bot. In season 1, he was skeptical about the prince's threat and only appearing now and then to warn John about funding. And in season 2, he fully cooperated with John's investigations into Gertrude's murder. He gave John the key to the tunnels, and he gave them the CCTV and everything, and he's like, he's just a guy, he's just a boss. No overt antagonistic actions. Until in the last season, when Elias kills Leitner. Brutal pipe murder. Which was the first obvious thing that Elias was bad. Like, yes, knowing now what Elias is, who he is, what he does, the things that he does in the first and second seasons are bad. But like subtly so, and like only because we know his intentions. The moment of him killing Leitner is the first moment where like, oh, Elias is bad. Oh no. And this, just 2 episodes after, we start seeing Elias becoming an antagonist while using his powers, which were not seen prior. We also now add the presence of Daisy as an antagonist as well, who wants to find/arrest John, which we don't want that. When we see Elias butt heads with Daisy in support of John, Elias's entire persona becomes mired in doubt. If he's so bad, why is he helping John? If he isn't so bad, why did he kill Leitner? Just mixed questions, All these questions begin to flow, and we have an amazing mixture of characters and arcs to continue with. And even then, we haven't even met all the players. Just these 2 first episodes set up for interesting character interactions and begin to establish how the story is going to progress between John and the Institute.
Though I don't know what sort of employment dispute leaves you without a change of clothes.
It's a big joke in like the story and in the fandom that John got kidnapped 3 times. So most of my writing will be separated by like these moments because it's easier to fragment them that way. And in truth, the moments that John gets kidnapped really do mark specific beats within the story and specific moments where John gains or loses like something. And they're a really good framework for season 3 in terms of like what's happening when and where, and what does John know. In 83, drawing a blank, John reads out a statement from Chloe Ashford regarding an animated skeleton dressed as a circus ringleader who kills her boss. John does a small investigation with the resources he has, and he doesn't find anything of note besides a picture of Beacon and Hope van at the department store. And then he reveals to us, the audience, the person he's talking to in the recorder, that the statement that he's reading was hand-delivered here in secret, and he doesn't know why. Before, in the first 2 seasons, John's investigation, the statements John reads were just things that he found in the Institute as he's organizing. And then in like season 2, we start like interspacing like the statements that he listens from that were recorded by Gertrude. But they didn't really have any like rhyme or reason. But now we start seeing like a quote unquote rhyme and reason for why he's reading the statements, and like the consequences of such are telegraphed very well in this season. John begins to get these statements from a stalker, as Georgie puts it, and these stalker statements, from a top-down perspective, we can see exactly why those statements were given to John, but he doesn't see them, obviously. And John actually thinks that these statements are not, like, the content of the statements is not as important, and it is the messages or morals for him to follow. And I find it hilarious that John's overreading into the statements, because finding out exactly, like, the reason why he's getting these statements is, like, he wasn't supposed to overread them. He was just supposed to read them and learn what they do, the content of it, not overreading and trying to understand, like, some underlying message about it, which is, kind of funny. For the purposes of this video, for now, the stalker will not be revealed yet. But the purpose of the statements will be, for drawing a blank, John believes the message to be that if I simply wait and see what happens, if I don't act what I know, then someone I care about may pay the price. In reality, this statement serves to introduce John to the presence of Nikola Orsnov, who was the mannequin dressed as a ringleader. John's next stalker statement is 85 Upon the Stairs, about a man relating his experience with the spiral to Willem Hughes Mearns' antagonist. John's message drawn from the statement is that confronting the horrors directly is dangerous, which directly contradicts the supposed message from the last episode. And the actual purpose, to me, isn't as obvious before, but I believe it's one of the interpretations that he does eventually land on, which is, quote, to consider how many of these creatures used to be people, referring to, like, the avatars he's seen about prior. John's last stalker statement is 87 Uncanny Valley, a recording of Gertrude Robinson reading a statement of Sebastian Skinner. John doesn't read too much into this statement as before, and he draws a conclusion as he needs, the connection to the unknowing, as well as a lead. Jude Perry. I also want to point out this statement really does serve important world building for the stranger, as we get one of its names, I do not know you. Which, like, I love those names that they have for the entities that really push the Eldritch idea vibe. Like, we see that this type of, like, phrase as a name for, like, Eldritch deities, Eldritch beings in, like, Lovecraftian cosmic horror stuff. And this is very cosmic horror stuff. And so I do like, I love the I do not know you title for the stranger. Throughout these episodes, we also have Georgie reacting to John's investigations. In drawing a blank, Georgie warns John that if he wants to fix the problem, he has to distance himself from it. And recording statements is the exact opposite of distance. She also doesn't like that John isn't telling her what the problem is, and doesn't like a stalker sending statements to her address. She doesn't like that the guy knows her address. That's creepy for her. And upon the stairs, she doesn't really comment on, like, the statement that he's doing, but she does tell him about her going on a date with a guy, with a jock, to, like, Hungarian food, and that Melanie King is back from the trip she took to India, which we heard she was going to in 76 Spell of Blood. In the Uncanny Valley, she doesn't support him listening to Gertrude's statement, trying to get him to tell her what's going on and wanting him to get better. After the statement, John hears the calliope music outside of the apartment, and Georgie sees the fear on his face and puts her foot down, and she's like, I do not want you to read or listen to any of the statements in my apartment, because it's weird, it's creepy. And John agrees to that. Following the lead from Uncanny Valley and soliciting the help from Melanie King, John's able to track down Jude Perry herself, voiced by Hannah Walker, who gives their statement in 89 Twice as Bright. Here, we get some lore about the desolation and how Jude became an avatar for the desolation, and John begins by asking questions, among which he asks if she burnt down the forest in the year prior, which was read about in Uncanny Valley. She responds willingly, and he follows it up with why. And it seems that Jude wants to, like, lie or not say anything, but she's compelled to, and she tells him to stop that. And John doesn't seem to, like, respond to this moment. He just thinks that she's just, like, screaming at him because she's evil. And Jude says that she wants to kill John, but won't as a favor to Elias, as there's a rumor that he killed Gertrude. And John almost pretty much demands her to tell him why she wants Gertrude dead, which he stops him because he's like, so tell me why you want Gertrude dead. She stops him and he says, try to compel me again and I'll burn it out of your mouth. Again, he doesn't really respond to this, but this is again the next instance since 61 Hard Shoulder where we have an avatar specifically reacting to John's compulsion and him beginning to realize that he has this like power now to be able to ask a question, people have to respond. Either way, Jude does give John a statement, and she admits to maybe having been compelled anyway. She's like, maybe I was compelled. Oh well. And threatens him again if he does it again. Like, she just, every single time, she's like, hey, I'm gonna kill you. And he's like, okay, do it. I've had worse threats. In the end, John really isn't satisfied with her answers because it was very like eccentric thing. She also gave him some advice, and I can't remember what advice it was, but I think it was mostly like keep your head out of this shit or something. And so he reaches a dead end, but she says she knows how to speak to a mic, and he's like, oh, with like with weird doors and like spirals and stuff, and she's like, no. He smells like ozone. He's like, oh, that mic. There's two Michaels. There's two Michaels. But she will only tell John if he shakes her hand, which he declined to do in the beginning of the episode. She was like, you didn't shake my hand. He's like, stupid. I'm not gonna shake your hand. You're made of fire. And in the pursuit of knowledge, John does because he has no other option to if he wants to continue. And she burns him, marking him with the fear of the desolation. In a step back, in a sort of like holistic sort of view, is that the right word? I don't know. We also know that the stalker statements had like a secondary purpose, which was to make John meet Jude Perry, and also for her to make him meet Mike Crew. In 91, A Coming Storm, John is up for tea from Mike Crew, voiced by Guy Kelly, and he begins trying to lead a conversation, but Mike doesn't really catch on. And eventually, John asks Mike how he got those scars, sort of like compelling him to, which Mike doesn't really kindly respond to at all. So he makes John feel vertigo, like he's falling, effectively silencing him, and like he's sitting on a chair and he feels like he's falling at, like, I think he said terminal velocity or something like that, which is terrifying. And Mike gives John his statement. He tells him about being followed by the Lichtenberg figure, which was an aspect of the spiral when he was younger that latched onto him when he got hit with lightning, which we saw in episode 4, Page Turner, and his search into finding Leitners to escape the Lichtenberg figure. First, he found a book on the corruption. I think he then found the Bone Turner's Tale, the flesh book. And then he found like an iBook, I think it's implied, that it tried reading him before he read it, and he didn't like that or whatever, he threw it away. And eventually he finds Exaltiora, which he used to trap the Lichtenberg figure and become an avatar of the vast, which we saw in episode 46, Literary Heights. Here, because of the vertigo, John gets marked by the fear of the vast. When Mike finishes his statement, John gets ambushed by Daisy, who's tracked John down. And this is the first time of 3 that John gets kidnapped, this moment, by Daisy. And we eventually find Daisy and John in like a windy location, probably like a cliff or forest, and she kills Mike. And then when John tries asking her why she's doing this, sort of maybe trying to compel her, but also like pleading for his life, she yells at him to stop asking questions, and she grabs John and seems about to kill him when Basira appears. And in that moment, when she grabs onto John, John gets marked by the fear of the hunt. And we saw in an episode prior, which I'll talk about in a bit, Basira asked Martin where Daisy was, and having heard her say she had full operational discretion, she knew where to go. She knew where she does her killings, and she interrupts Daisy as she's about to kill John, giving John some time. And he convinces both of them that Elias killed both Leitner and Gertrude. And Daisy knows about like his compounding. She's like, I went into to give him the tape, and he made me spill my guts. And they talk about like this ability that he has for compelling someone, and the three of them are like, or actually, I think mostly just Basira and Daisy are like, let's make John use it on Elias to make him confess that he killed Gertrude and Leitner. And if he fails, Daisy will just kill John. And so they bury my crew and head to the Institute. Daisy kidnapping John and Basira saving him clears the way for him to return to the Institute, no longer being pursued by the police, and helps bring the characters together. And while John was going through these investigations, the Institute and its employees were changing as well.
John, the head archivist, is absent, so I'll be trying to fill in as best as I can.
In 84 Possessive, we have the first instance of a statement being read out of an episode fully, without John knowing about it. Martin reads out a statement of Adrian Weiss and the strange things he saw at a junkyard when he was younger. And after he delivers his statement, Martin is audibly shaken from the story, partially from the horrifying event that he read, and partially from slightly maybe being taken over by the eye to be able to read it. And he talks about the investigation, about like the junkyard or whatever. The statement in of itself is not that important. And then he apologizes for the absence of the head archivist John, whom he's filling in for. After he reads the statement, Melanie appears. Melanie King, voiced by Lydia Nichols, appears asking for John. And when Martin tells her John's under suspicion of killing someone, she also doesn't believe John capable of murder. And she expresses frustration about not having any friends or a job, because Ghost Hunt UK, I believe, just like broke down after episode 28 Skin Type, which is when Elias appears and offers her an archival assistant job, the job Sasha had, which is now empty because Sasha's dead. And Martin verbally objects to this, but Melanie agrees with him anyway, and she becomes an important character as well. And I also wanted to mention that Ben Meredith, really, the voice actor for Elias Bouchard, really makes a really good job at making this man, this academic researcher, boss man, sound so mundane in the most mundane moments, and so evil too in the moments that require it. So here, Melanie King was a very interesting character in the first few times that we met her, as she and John really butted heads. They're both incredibly smart and have built who they are by this intelligence. And whereas John went the path of academia, Melanie freelanced instead, doing Ghost Hunt UK, leading both of them to have like shared interests in the paranormal, but having divergent approaches of how to approach the paranormal. They clash because they see each other's approaches as the wrong way, but when they put their heads together, they do get along, and that dynamic is like really fun. You know, like they do not like each other as a person, but then like academically, like best friends, maybe. I don't know. That I just find that fun. In episode 86, Tucked In, we begin to hear Tim reading out a statement. Tim Stoker, voiced by Mike LeBeau. And we see he can't really follow through, and he's frustrated and dejected, and he berates the recorder and anybody listening to it. He warns whoever it is that is listening to get out of the Institute while they still can. He sees himself as a prisoner in the Institute, unable to quit, and we see this in 65 Binary, where he got into arguments with John over this, and they state how Tim cannot physically quit, and John cannot fire him, like they're compelled to. And now here, he begins to reject the work that he does in the Institute. Melanie walks in, and Tim tells her that she shouldn't be here, she shouldn't work here, and he makes her feel unwelcomed, like Martin in the first place. And she digs in her heels, wanting and needing a job. And Tim asks her about Sasha, because she was a person who saw through the not Sasha and recognized that this was not the person who they're pretending to be. And that leaves him feeling very emotional. And he gives her the statement as she needs to leave. He needs to lie down. The statement is of Benjamin Attendi and his encounter with the still and lightless beast, which eventually kills him. This statement was read out by Melanie instead of Tim. And in the end of the episode, Melanie meets up with John at a restaurant in like secret. And John tells her she shouldn't have got a job at the Institute, and she's like, this is the third time she's heard of that, and she gets a little angry because of it. She's like, come on, guys, and I know, she says I know it's a boys club, but like, come on. And he tells her he's only saying that because there are strange things happening at Institute, and she didn't need to be a part of, but she disagrees, and calling back to like the investigation she's been doing about the slaughter, and she's like, I've been in this. So like, tell me. John wants her to spy more or less on the Institute for him while he's on the run, or like not spy so much as like use the resources for him. And she agrees to do that only if John tells her everything that happened. And he agrees to it, which ends the episode, presumably, as he begins to tell Melanie about Sasha, because she started the Not Sasha attack. She heard Tim being so emotional about Sasha, and she tells John, tell me everything, start with Sasha. And that's it. The episode ends. And it's very interesting that they don't really show him telling her about it, because one would presume that she would have some form of like not believing. I was like, no, I don't believe that monsters exist and like eldritch horrors exist, etc. But it's implied that she does like understand it like quickly, and she gets it. And I like that that like they trust us to realize that. I like that Johnny Sims trusts the audience to realize that Melanie would just agree and follow along, and it doesn't seem contrived that she does, because of everything that's been built up. I like that a lot. And also, something also very interesting, John decides to tell Melanie everything, but not Georgie. The obvious difference is that Melanie's already in the path of danger, quote unquote, and she being hired at the Institute and all, and that's, you're in it now, let me tell you everything that's been happening. But Georgie isn't. Eventually, we'll get into why John wanted to avoid telling Georgie about anything when we get to that. But on the other side, him telling Melanie about everything, we see him following up on his need for allies that he mentioned in A Guest for Mr. Spider. Turning to Melanie, a relationship he hasn't yet tarnished, and knows that he needs to do this to be able to progress with the mystery. Why he treats the two women differently shows his priority of gaining knowledge that we saw in season 2, how he kept like just gaining knowledge without thinking about the consequences of it. But John's grown, and he has learned that he needs to be careful. He's cognizant of the sloppy way he investigated prior and the bad stuff that came from that, and now he's being very careful. And he's being very calculated, and he's starting to have allies. We see John taking a different approach than before, which is an amazing character growth for him since season 2. In 88 Dig, we begin with Martin and Basira, voiced by Frank Voss, who came to the Institute looking for Daisy, who had disappeared after interrogations a few episodes prior. They talk about John, and Martin gets a little jealous of John and Basira's rapport. She says he was a little funny, and Martin's like, John's funny? I don't think he's that funny. And Basira's like, maybe you didn't listen correctly. Martin gets a little defensive, and Martin tells Basira of Daisy's full operational discretion, whatever thing. This is when that happens, and then she hurries away, and Martin's like, great, let me just read out this statement that I had, which is of Enrique Macmillan, and the Leitner he found that compels him to dig. Again, after the fact, Martin comes out of the statement feeling bothered. He hasn't really fully gotten used to it yet, but the more he does it, the easier it'll get for him. This episode, we also get Melanie asking about the database search for people, looking for Jude Perry, which we get like the consequences, the return of that in 89 Twice as Bright, obviously. In 90 Bodybuilder, we begin with Elias confronting Tim, who took an unannounced vacation to Malaysia between the events of Tucked In and Now. Elias asks if Tim wants to leave them, and Tim's like, yes, obviously I do, but he got sicker the longer he was away, and he had to return, or else he felt like he was gonna die. And Elias warns Tim that if he tries to leave, then he'll die. But he's not like it's not a threat or anything. It's like, see, this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen if you leave. And Tim tries to get Elias to admit that there's something evil and supernatural here, but Elias deflects, saying, Tim, this place is very old, has all sorts of idiosyncrasies, and not all of them are good for the people who work here. Idiosyncrasies is a really interesting word choice, Elias. He assures Tim that he only needs to keep his head down and work, and just it'll eventually pass. We begin to see here Tim's decline as he both accepts that he's trapped here, he's a prisoner here, and he does everything in his power to distract himself, losing himself in his anger and his despair. Elias and Tim leave as Martin comes in, who reads the statement of Ross Davenport and his encounter with Jared Hopworth, the bone turner. Martin seems to recover pretty quickly after this statement, again showing his growing comfort in his position. And from here on out, Martin begins to carry episodes, becoming a character of great import equal to John. And this carries into season 4 as well. But here, we begin to establish Martin very, very well.
You may call them, I do not know you.
The second time John is kidnapped is near the midpoint of the season, and the midpoint of the entirety of the show. It is a consequence of the investigations that he begins to do once he returns to the Institute, and all the characters come together. In 92, Nothing Beside remains. A lot of information is presented to us, a lot of it. First, we find ourselves in Elias's office as he reads. He calls the police, notifying them of Daisy, who's looking. They're looking for Daisy, and then Elias reads out a letter from Barnabas Bennett to Jonah Magnus, pleading for him to save him from being forsaken in the lonely by Mordecai Lucas. Elias says that Jonah never really helped Barnabas, as he wanted to watch what happened to him, and he advises John, who he knows will eventually listen to this again, that any of the allies he makes are simply tools for him. Quote, you may believe yourself to have friends, to have confidants, but in the end, all they are is something for you to watch, to know, ultimately to discard. This, at least, Gertrude understood. Then, Martin rushes in to announce that John's arrived, and he and Basira and Daisy barge in. John attempts to compel Elias to tell the truth, which Elias resists. He's like, ooh, I have a tingly feeling. Anyways, Martin, go get Tim and Melanie, and they join as well. And once they do, Elias confesses that he killed Gertrude and Jürgen Leitner, to which they all respond with equal parts surprise, mainly that the old man was Jürgen Leitner, and accepting. They're like, I knew it. I knew you killed him. When Daisy threatens to kill Elias, they are interrupted by an intercall call from Elias's receptionist, Rosie Zampano, voiced by Hannah Branken, who says there are police waiting to talk to Elias. Elias traps Daisy. He had given evidence of Daisy's actions, the ones he threatened about in 82 Eyewitness, to the police, and they're looking for her. And he says he'll make them go away if Basira signs an employment of contract, which she does, making Daisy stand down, allowing for Elias to send the police away to get them away. And then 4 or 5, I forget. Then he tells everyone that those who are tied to the Institute, John, Martin, Melanie, Tim, and now Basira, will die if Elias or the Institute are destroyed. When questioned, he says that if they want to gamble to see if that's true, go ahead. But then you'd be seeing the people you care about most die, Daisy. He traps Daisy into helping him do errand stuff, hunt stuff, and gets Basir into the archives, bringing her into now as a main character, and then he just dismisses them all to talk to John alone. When they speak, this is the 5th or 6th now, new information, Elias tells John that as the archivist, he must learn on his own, which is why he killed Jürgen Leitner, sent John the stalker statements, and allowed John to investigate on his own, and it's John's mission to find out how to stop the unknowing. He describes what it is, this is 7 now, a ritual to bring the stranger into our world, and that John must do all the legwork so that he can gain the power necessary to face the stranger. When John says that he didn't choose to be an archivist, Elias says that he did. Quote, you never wanted to know, but I'm afraid you absolutely did choose it. In 100 ways, at 100 thresholds, you pressed on. You sought knowledge relentlessly, and you always chose to see. Like I've touched on before, John made the conscious decision to keep investigating, which has led him to this point, shouldered with the burden of stopping the unknowing. Near the end of the episode, John asks Elias if he's still human. He's been confronted with these people that look like people, Michael and Jude and Mike and Jane and even not Sasha to some extent, and yet they're all still monsters to his eyes. He knows he's taking power from the eye. He knows about his compulsion. He knows that he's able to do more, but he's afraid of becoming a monster like them. Elias brushes away this question and sends John on his way. John's investigations into the unknowing begin in 93 Contaminant, reading a statement from Lester Chang about his father-in-law, Greg Russell's compulsion of cleaning, discovering him being taken over by purple fungus and subsequent disappearance. In it, there's a mention of Regan and Hope, they're implied to have taken Greg Russell away. And John sees this as a lead. He says, Elias sent me this to know where to begin. And so he eventually finds a statement in 96 Return to Sender of the original Alfred Brecken and how Brecken and Hope replaced him and his shipping company. And the statement itself was left in an envelope addressed to John on top of a pile of discarded mail in the location of the original Brecken and Hope shipping services. He's now confident that Brecken and Hope, who are recurring characters that circle around different statements, are connected to the stranger, but in what capacity he doesn't really know yet. Along with this statement, he does also find a ledger, which leads him to the trophy room, the same place in 54 Still Life with Alexander Scalpelhorn. Along with Daisy, they arrest a woman who identifies herself as Sarah Baldwin, voiced by Alice Adzowa, who is the same woman that Melanie encountered in 28 Skin Tight, and one of the people listed as missing in episode 1, Anglerfish. John compels her, and she says that they stopped coming, that Brecken and Hope stopped coming to the taxidermy shop when the skin disappeared. And John remembers the gorilla skin mentioned prior, and she says it's important for the unknowing. John asks where it is, and that really throws Sarah. She says that Gertrude stole it and killed Daniel Rawlings. Everyone here is surprised, not knowing what to do now, and somehow Sarah escapes. At another dead end, Elias sends John another statement. In 97, We All Ignore the Pit, John reads about Jackson Ellis's experience of a pit in Bucota, Washington. And John is confused as to why this was sent, as it has no connection to the stranger or the unknowing. This episode's important as it shows the sunken sky ritual for the berry that was foiled by Gertrude Robinson. And Elias didn't really know what to do with it, and he just sent it to John, hoping that he would find some more sense from it, considering this was part of Gertrude's notes, Gertrude's collection of things trying to learn about rituals and stuff. And so Elias didn't really know why she had it there, but it's probably this was part of her notes to stop the ritual of the buried. After the statement, the lights blow out in the apartment, and John tries to turn it on, but a voice interrupts him, telling him not to. John's afraid and asks who it is, and it says its name is Nicola Orsonov, voiced by Jessica Law, who wanted to talk to him after he interrogated Sarah. Having learned that the gorilla skin is gone, Nicola Orsonov demands John to find it for her. Threat of violence. In 99 Dust to Dust, John listens to a statement from Gertrude Robinson of Robert E. Geiger and the Dust Bowl, which I learned about in 9th grade biology class. The end of it has Michael Shelley, voiced by Luke Boyes, asking Gertrude a question. He's like, did you want the translation? Do you already have one or whatever? This distracts John as he reels from learning that Michael the Distortion, that he's met multiple times prior, used to be human. And he begins worrying about turning into a monster like Michael seemed to do. Georgie comes in, hearing him yell, and he says he needs to get away from her because he fears he's turning into something inhuman and would put her in danger. And Georgie argues that what he really needs is people, more than just her and maybe Martin. He agrees, coming down from his panic, and plans to find some place to move out soon. In some sort of small irony, just as John is working on his own, not at the Institute, moving out from Georgie's apartment, he's kidnapped by Brecken and Hope. In 101 Another Twist, John's hidden away for about a month underneath the Wax Museum in Great Yarmouth, mentioned in Season 2 as the one that Not Sasha visits frequently, which is also stated as the worst wax museum in the world. It's real. Shade. Nicole Orsnoff seems to have changed her mind, leading her to kidnap John and prepares him as they want to use his skin instead of the gorilla's, because an archivist's skin is also pretty important, because the gorilla skin was like really old skin, and so that was why it was important to the Unknowing. Like an archivist's skin would also be useful. And a little later, Michael Distortion appears, and he intends to kill John before he can be used to complete the Unknowing, because Michael does not want the Unknowing to happen. But he does deliver a statement first, telling John about the Great Twisting ritual and how Gertrude used Michael Shelley to undo it, to become Michael the Distortion. After Michael's statement, he makes a door where he will kill John, painlessly and quickly. But when they attempt to cross it, the door is locked. Michael tries to open it. He dies and turns into Helen Distortion. And Helen, voiced by Imogen Harris, who was the same Helen Richardson that we met in 47 New Door, is as confused as John, and that allows him to escape Nicole Orsnoff and the Stranger. This season has less of an emphasis on Gertrude Robinson than the last season, which sucks because I love Sue Sims as Gertrude Robinson. But as the mystery of her death was like fully solved, like it was Elias who killed Gertrude. That mystery is no longer up in the air. Elias has Gertrude's notes as to how to stop the Unknowing, which Leitner also wanted to get those. But he doesn't want to show John, and he just wants him to find his own conclusions. And as we follow along with John, we discover that Gertrude was stopping her rituals. She was unnamed, but she stopped the Sunken Sky ritual, like the guy, I just forgot his name, the guy who talked about the we all ignore the pit. He saw an old woman there, and the guy with the bluest eyes he's ever seen, Jan Kilbride. And that was the stopping of the ritual. We don't know about that until Submerged, I believe. We learn about that in season 4. We get the confirmation in season 4. But yes, she stopped the Sunken Sky. She also stopped the Great Twisting, which we got like a full showing of that in 101 Great Twisting. She also stole the gorilla skin. She looks like she was also stopping the Unknowing at some point. Again, signs begin to point at Gertrude, and John focuses again on what Gertrude was doing, as his own investigations are going nowhere.
What?
Our archivist is on leave.
While John and Elias research the Unknowing, the other characters react around this and have their own moments. They're also told to do something to search for the Unknowing. At some point, Martin and Melanie are told about the Unknowing, but Tim is not. We'll get into that, but that's off screen. And intertwined with John's story is Georgie. Like I said, she doesn't really get as much screen time, so this is the part where I'm going to talk about the progression of her storyline in this season. In 93 Contaminant, Georgie comes home earlier than John wanted, and he tries to cover up that he was recording, and she's like really angry, and she explicitly told him to not do that, and she doesn't want that in her apartment. And he apologizes profusely. He says, "I'll just leave," and he just forgot that she said, and he just needs to get this done. It's like this is literally the statement he got from Elias after that. He needed to start the investigations. He hasn't moved out yet, and he'll get out of his hair. And she's like, "No, you don't get to leave. After all this, you don't get to leave. And if you leave, you won't get any of the recordings that you've done." Like, she took all the recordings that he's done, and she took them as evidence because she thought that, well, he was kidnapped by Daisy at that point. This is the first kidnapping part. And so she took all the recordings. She thought she needed evidence eventually for when they found his dead body. But she's like, she's holding him hostage. He'll get them back if he tells Georgie what's happening. And he relents, and he tells her about the Institute. Georgie's the first person to question how John gets the job, with only a position as a researcher being elevated to a head archivist. In fact, she says it kind of makes sense, because he became a head archivist despite his lack of qualifications, saying, if there's no one above you, there's no one to point out you're doing everything wrong. And this moment is more or less played for laughs, but in reality, Georgie very nearly unravels Elias's plans without really meaning to. And John pulls attention back to the supernatural, He's like, enough about my qualifications. I'm telling you what's happening right now. And Georgie believes him that there are monsters. She says she knows that monsters are real. And John's very surprised at her quick acceptance and believes himself to be turning into a monster, which leads to conversation I mentioned prior in Dust of him feeling like a monster. He describes what he can do and compels Georgie to answer a question, and she's even more convinced after that. And John describes the people who draw from the dark powers. This is the first mention of Avatar, as Georgie names them, and John says he's becoming one. And we finally have a character who's like an audience surrogate, questioning some of the more absurd things that we didn't really think to question in the first place, and establishing what we all call of the people who draw power from the fears, avatars. Like, that is, like, avatars came from Georgie. She named them, and we all call them avatars now because of Georgie. So we're gonna give her her dues for doing that. I will not be surprised if she names the externals avatars in Magnus Protocol. That's getting ahead of myself. John explains a bit further, catching Georgie up on what he's investigating and why. And she then asks if there is a power focused on death. And John names the End, which was named multiple times prior. This leads to 94 Dead Woman Walking, where Georgie gives John a statement about her college days when she encountered a corpse woman, a cadaver, who imbued people with a sense of helplessness about death. She was able to cover her ears from it getting only like a fraction of the effect before returning to normal, but she never experienced fear ever again. After the statement, John feels exhausted, having consumed 2 statements in such a short notice, but also in learning that Georgie knows about this world. As I mentioned before, John was reluctant to tell Georgie about his problems, but was fine with telling Melanie because she was stuck with him. He wanted Georgie to be safe. He says, quote, "I kind of wish I knew even one person who genuinely wasn't involved." And we also feel this small tragedy as that John is stuck in this situation. This sentiment is more or less reiterated in season 4 when John listens to some music Daisy recommends him, and he says it's good to hate something that's mundane. And again in season 5, when John and Martin reflect that everyone they know was an avatar or someone similar. Georgie began as an anchor for John for the outside, and he loses that from her, but she doubles down eventually and stays an anchor for John to escape. Yes, she knows about the horde. Yes, she knows about everything that's going on, but she's still going to try to help John get out of this. She's divorced from the things happening, even though she knows about them, and she constantly tries to get John to free himself. And his inability to do so is his own failure. And Georgie will just eventually give up and let him go in season 4 for her own good. But for now, she'll try her best. And I think this is like, I don't want to look at Georgie as just a feature for John's story and John's character arc. Like, she is her own character, and her compassion is really pushed forward here as trying to get John. And once she sees that her compassion just isn't going anywhere, she's not going to spend any more like energy doing that, because that's just unhealthy for her, which is why she breaks away from John in season 4 and is angry with John in season 4 because of all that. And I like the building up of this compassion is important here, because we also see John being compassionate. I'll talk about John in compassion a little bit later in regards to him being a monster. But we like it's looking at Georgie. Georgie is a good example of a character who is compassionate but still does not want to help anyone else because of her own energy levels, and you understand, like, she is a very complex character in that she wants to help, but if you don't want to help, she can't do anything about that. And it's sad, but I love Georgie. I love her so much. The other members of the Institute continue with their lives trapped to work in the archives. In 95, absent without leave, Martin doesn't really know what to do, so he just continues reading statements. Even though John's back, no one tells him what to do. He's just going to keep doing what he needs to do. He openly expresses discomfort for reading them, but wants to support John. He doesn't know what John's doing specifically and is worried about him. And Basira interrupts him And he discovers she's been there the entire time, just reading the same book. And she seems pretty excited about it. And Martin questions why she doesn't try to escape. And she says she's seen what happens if they even try. And rather than dwell on it, she's trying to learn more. Basira's more or less nonchalance this season is very telling of how she deals with situations, reorienting and adjusting as necessary. Like in season 4, Daisy mentions that Basira doesn't really plan. She just goes. We kind of see that she's not planning anything. She's just waiting out, learning, stuff like that, so that when it comes time to it, she will do with the things that she knows without needing to plan. What she's doing contrasts with Melanie and Tim's actions, who are actively fighting against this sort of like prison that they're in, and she supports Martin's idea to keep recording statements, hopeful to find something helpful. Martin reveals in 98 Lights Out that Elias told him that he needed to make up for John's lack by doing these statements. He says that John's not inconsistent. He tells it to Tim, who rages against this. And when he brings up John, Tim says that they spoke, but John reached for a recorder. He says, quote, "I freaked out a bit and I said some stuff. If you want to talk, no tapes. I just hate that thing." Tim, out of anybody else in the Institute, questions the use of the tapes and is the only one frequently acknowledging that someone else is listening to them. Martin and the others speak to the tapes as if it's like some researcher that's going to listen to them in the future. And John's just on another level with the tapes. But Tim's the only one who looks at them and questions what they are truly for. And that's pretty exciting. Martin tells Tim that John's avoidance of them is so that they aren't hurt. And Tim counters that, saying that like ignorance doesn't protect them, and that ignorance didn't protect them from Michael. Like they couldn't do anything. And so that makes me think, like, if they had known about Michael, if John would have told them about Michael in the corridors, would they have gone through the door? Would they have feel more prepared? It's hard to tell exactly what would have happened if they knew about the supernatural. But at this point, it's like we gotta know, so that we gotta know what we're facing. After the statement, again, Martin feels discomfort, which Melanie comments on when she enters, asking where Elias is. She's like, "Are you okay?" They talk about the difficulty of the reading statements, and Melanie mentions the statement she read, and she's like, "Yeah, it was kind of off." And Martin asks if she can do the statements for him. She says she'll talk to Elias to try to help Martin, to like get him off his back. And she also asks him about the drink with Basira, and he's like, "But it's the middle of the day and we're working." And she's like, "You're really saying that this is a normal place to work at?" He's like, "Yeah, let me get a drink." She says, give me before that, give me like an hour." And so we see Melanie attempt her first assassination attempt on Elias, bring him a poisoned cup of coffee. He sees right through it, and he warns her that any other attempts will be met with resistance. The midpoint of the season and the show, which I alluded to prior, is during John's second kidnapping. 100, I Guess You Had to Be There, is a very fun episode, but more or less inconsequential. There isn't any like character growth here for me, character arcs or like plot lines being followed, but the lack of coherency from the statement givers does highlight the importance of the archivist for the statements, of John being there to be able to like get these life statements from people. And it highlights the compulsion given to the Institute because of the archivist and the eye. Other important about this episode is the introduction of Lynn Hammond, aka Celia Ripley, in the Magnus Protocol, voiced by Lorianne Davis. I'm not going to get into how important she is right now. I just know that she knows, as well as Peter Lucas's first appearance, voiced by Alasdair Stewart. But otherwise, there's not that much here except for fun.
哦，你说中文？
I don't. Why?
The last time John's kidnapped is as a consequence of his new plan, which is to follow what Gertrude was doing to stop the Unknowing. After being freed from the stranger's agents, in 102 Nesting Instinct, John confronts Elias for seemingly not doing anything to save him for a month, which Elias says he was trying, but he had to keep everyone in the dark so they could concentrate and focus on what they were doing, so he couldn't tell them that John was kidnapped because they'd be worried about him. He was like, "You need to work," and And, and Elias admits to John that Gertrude's notes are lacking, and he was hoping John would connect the dots from Gertrude's statements on his own, meaning even Elias didn't know what they were for, which I find so stupidly funny. John pushes for more information, for better information, which Elias does give, naming some aspects of the unknowing. We need the choir, the answer, forget the other ones. And he knew that Gertrude was planning for something, but wasn't exactly sure what. And John wonders if there was anybody else who knew about her plans besides Leitner, Jürgen Leitner, and Gerard Key, which Elias responds with surprise at, since he knew exactly which statement John was getting, and knew that John did not simply read that somewhere, that they worked together. But his powers progressed enough to know all of that with his eye powers. Because of this, Elias gets excited, and he tells John to follow Gertrude's travels to try to find what she found, to get his conclusions from her, and do what she was going to do anyways. He also tells John to disarm Melanie as she was approaching with a knife for the second assassination attempt. She appears angry at John for not being here at the Institute, until he explains that he was kidnapped. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to kill him now. And she yells that Elias is manipulating them all. Melanie is so desperate to be free, fueled by the anger of the slaughter bullet that is inside her that we don't learn about until season 4. And we see her lashing out. And it's worrying to watch this, worrying that she might make a misstep here. After that, John reads a statement from Francois Deschamps, whose co-worker was acting strange, who then encounters Gertrude and Gerard, asking if the co-worker that was acting strange was affected by either the stranger or the corruption. And this statement was entirely written in French, which John read fluently and directly translated as he recorded. John tracks Gertrude in Toulouse in 2014, and according to the files on her laptop, went to New Zealand next. So John sets the archives to find any statements set in New Zealand. In the last part of this episode, I wanted to mention, John and Martin talk, and it's not for the first time, but definitely more vulnerable with each other than other times. John apologizes for not being there all the time, and Martin apologizes for not knowing he was kidnapped, and John's like, listen, he didn't tell anyone, so it's not your fault, you're fine. And he tells John about a summary of how everyone's doing here. Tim's bad. Melanie's trying to kill Elias. Basira seems fine, just happy reading. When Martin says he's recording a statement, John asks if he's okay, and Martin assures him that yes, it's unpleasant, but if it helps John, he'll do it. And there's an unspoken for you in there somewhere. And then John gives him his goodbye, saying that he's going to be going away for a while, and he leaves to travel. In 103, Cruelty Free, John reads a statement of Dylan Anderson and the accursed flesh pig. He finds Gertrude asking about circuses in New Zealand. This circus was innocuous, having lost a clown to the flesh pig, but John's able to find Mr. Anderson's brother, Kurt, for follow-up questions, who is voiced by Stephen Violik. He mentions that Gertrude left in a hurry and left some stuff behind, but refused to talk to John anymore, and John blackmails him by compelling him to reveal a secret, and then uses that to get him the papers that Gertrude left behind. In the end of the episode, John meets with Daisy in the tunnels and gets her to promise to keep an eye on everyone, and plants a seed that if there was any evidence of Elias's crimes, he could be arrested. And now that Elias has fully shown his mentor/antagonist position at the Institute, everyone begins to follow Melanie's lead to try to escape from Elias and the Institute. While John's traveling, we do get an important statement in 104 sneak preview, where Martin asks Tim for a book he's renting from the library about circuses. When Martin says they're investigating about the Unknowing, Tim doesn't really know what he's talking about, and then he mentions it has to do with circuses. Tim goes a little crazy. He says there hasn't been a statement about circuses since 24 Strange Music, considering also that episode 44 Tightrope was not a thing that the Institute knew about. It was just a Gertrude statement. And he would have known, he would have heard about it. Tim would have heard about it, but Martin says he's been out of the loop, saying Tim's, quote, never been there to tell. Tim gets angry and turns off the recorder to tell Martin why he's angry. And the recorder turns right back on, and Martin insists that he should record it because John needs to hear to understand what happened, and it's better than them arguing in person. So Tim gives his statement of his brother Danny's disappearance, the connection to the circus, and why Tim started working at the archives in the first place. This episode gives much further depth into Tim's character and finally brings him into the fold after the majority of the season without him invested. And in the end of the episode, Elias appears and warns Tim from staying away from the Unknowing as he's too volatile. But Tim digs in his heels and insists on helping out. Like, you're not gonna keep me out after learning about this. I must know what happened to Denny, or at least avenge Denny. And Tim becomes part of the Unknowing plan. In 1 in 5 Total War, Johnny's finally left London, having tracked Gertrude, traveling from New Zealand. It was France, Toulouse, to New Zealand. I have the map in front of me in my mind. Toulouse, New Zealand, to Beijing. He's at the Puisong Research Center in Beijing, pulling statements that Gertrude had pulled, trying to find what she found. Zhang Xiaoling, the librarian in the Songling Research Center, voiced by Peng Wei, says some terms in Mandarin, which John doesn't realize he understands. She even asks in Mandarin if he spoke the language, and he says, "No, I don't. Why?" And there's a very interesting moment here where she asks how long he's been an archivist for this dude. He says like 2 years. And she comments that Elias made a good choice. There's something dubious here. I don't really like get it. There's something dubious here, but it doesn't really matter. Anyways, the statement that he reads is from the second lieutenant Charles Fleming and the things he encountered in the Taiping Rebellion. After the fact, John discovers that the statement he pulled was the incorrect one. It was still pulled by Gertrude in the past, but not the ones pulled more recently, which were actually sent to address in Chicago. So John heads to the U.S. now. So Toulouse, New Zealand, Beijing, Chicago. It's eventually revealed that the one of the two statements that Gertrude pulled was a statement read in 137 Nemesis about the Slaughter's ritual, the Risen War. I don't know where the other statement was, but we have to believe it's not significant to the story, probably something related to the Slaughter's ritual. In 106, Matter of Perspective, Melanie reads Jan Kilbright's statement about his experience on Daedalus, which we saw in 57 Personal Space, which is a great storyline. Love everything about sending one person into space to scare them. And then she attempts to kill Elias for a third time. This attempt makes him retaliate, finally, showing Melanie how her father died in Ivy Meadows, which we saw in 36 Taken Ill, who died because of John Amherst, instead of from smoke inhalation from the fire as previously believed. He threatens her, saying, "If you try to interfere with me again in any way, I will drive that image so deep into your psyche that even if you are right, even if you live, it will be there every time you close your eyes." When he says, "Even if you're right," I believe it's she does not believe that they will all die if he dies. That's what he's saying there. Anyways, he leaves her a crying mess in pain from the knowledge. And here, Elias slides even further and further down into antagonism, getting worse and worse in the eyes of the characters and us, the audience. In 107 Third Degree, John's in Chicago, and he finds the address from Songling to be a dead end, as Gertrude and Jerry left a forwarding address to the Usher Foundation, which is the sister. So Puisong was a sister research center to Magnus Institute in London, and the Usher Foundation is also a sister institute. So the forwarding address sent to Usher Foundation would just send anything else back to the Magnus Institute. So he's a dead end, but he also knows that he notices that a bus travels through Pittsburgh, where Gerard Key was reported to have died, and he's not fully sure if he is fully dead or not, and so he believes, anyways, that Gertrude and Gerard passed that way. Anyways, he also believes he's being followed by like a cop. And a few days later, John appears again on the recorder, sounding visibly slightly tired, and he says the hospital was a dead end, but confirms that Jerry did actually die, and learns that Gertrude was arrested from breaking into the morgue where his body was. And then looking into the arrest, Gertrude was able to avoid charges, and then the book that she was found using disappeared, and the laceration on Jerry's body was unexplained. Throughout it all, John's sounding much more and more like he's getting sicker, and he's even certain that he's being followed. Eventually, John gets a statement in the mail from Elias of Howard Ewing and his encounter with a desolation monster, Officer Sands. After reading it, he feels much better, and which further pushes the idea that people working for the Institute aren't able to leave for long, and that he gains power from the statements. We also see this, obviously, in 122 Zombie, when Basira arrives at the hospital and gives John a statement, and he reads it after waking up, and he feels much better. That. Now, feeling better, he decides to go on the bus to go to the Usher Foundation in DC. And on like a little break before the bus is about to leave, an English woman appears who was tipped off that someone is asking strange questions in Pittsburgh and had attraction and attention of something they've been tracking. And John's kidnapped once more. This is the last kidnapping. And it turns out to be Julia Montauk, voiced by Francesca Renee Reed, who tells him that she'll take him to DC. On the drive over, they're pulled over by a policeman named Max Musterman, voiced by Brock Winstead. They have a small altercation in which, appearing from the trunk, Trevor Herbert shoots the policeman. Trevor, voiced by Ian Hales, joins them in the car ride, sticking the policeman in the car. This is like that one post of like, what if there was, what was it, Fall Out Boy performing? No, My Chemical Romance performing, and then, who was it? Yeah, Fall Out Boy, and then Panic at the Disco, and then Dan and Phil holding gay flags and kissing. That's this episode. That's this episode with all the different people appearing. 108 monologue statement read out by Martin about Adonis Bureau's slow descent into the lonely. Turns out to be a dead end for Martin because he thought it was something about like the circus, but no, it's about the lonely. But Peter Lucas appears again, asking about Elias. He briefly scares Martin with innocuous questions, and then leaves them alone. Basira appears and tells Martin about the things she's been reading about, specifically about the People's Church of the Divine Host, but Martin cuts her off by asking if Melanie's alright. The readings Basira's been doing are going to end up being useful in season 4, so we're just planting those seeds now, so we don't have to like reiterate why. Also, this is when they start talking about, hey, Melanie's messed up from Elias. We need to do something about that. In 109 Nightfall, we have Trevor and Julia speaking with John in a cabin deep in the woods, and they're waiting for Max Musterman, who's now just ahead on the table, to like regrow like lungs to be able to speak so they can interrogate him. And during the wait, John convinces Trevor and Julia to tell him how they first met, stopping some agents of the Church of the Divine Host doing something bad. I don't know exactly what they were doing. They're doing something bad. Eventually, Max does wake up, and he complains about like, y'all should have chopped out my ears because y'all are annoying. And John compels him to tell them why he was following them. And John recognizes Max as an agent of the Stranger, likely one of the anatomy students in the 34 anatomy class. And Max says that he wants to take John back to London and prepare him for the Unknowing. He was just trying to get him back, and he demands if they want to learn more, that the recorder be turned off. He asks, "Do you know who's listening?" Or something like that. And Trevor and Julia force John to do so. So we don't hear exactly what Max says after the fact. In 110, Creature Features statement of Alexa Crawley, Neil Ligorio, and a Leitner, read out by Martin, doesn't affect anything currently within this season until season 4, but it does seem that Martin's less bothered by the statements here. After it, Basira and him are talking, as she just told him about what Elias did to Melanie, and Melanie joins them, and then all three of them begin to discuss, and they realize that Elias has a limited vision and can't be distracted. Like, he was doing, I don't know, inventory, I think he said. No, not inventory, like payroll or something. He gets distracted, and so they're like, we can use this. He's not omniscient. He has to focus. So we can do something with this. 111 Family Business is a big episode. John is given a page by Julia and Trevor, direct from the catalog of the Trapped Dead, which was recovered by Trevor and Julia. I think it's implied that they were the people who stole it from the morgue. I don't know exactly how they got their hands on it. Could have been that Gertrude encountered them and gave it to them. I'm not fully sure. But they have it. And they gave a page to him. And they say this will help answer some questions. He reads out the page and it describes the death of Gerard Key, and a ghostly apparition of Jerry appears, having been trapped into the book by Gertrude. The laceration on his back that went unexplained. Gerard, voiced by John Gravy, is at first standoffish towards John, hating Julie and Trevor for keeping in the book just for information. He says, "I'm not your monster manual." But John says he's the head archivist, which makes Jerry realize and asks when Gertrude died and how. And John responds, about a year after Jerry died, and not peacefully. They sort of land on a truce. John asks for his help with the Unknowing, and Jerry says he won't help him unless John agrees to free him. And he does, despite his fear for the hunters, and he rips the page out of the book. And Jerry says he doesn't really know much, only that the Unknowing, the ritual, is pretty robust, and that it's only vulnerable after it begins. Which I don't know I don't remember if Elias had said something like that before, but at least we get like double confirmation if that. Jerry also says that Gertrude had a storage unit which had some stuff that might help them, and she had hidden a key, which Sean found earlier in 62 first edition. Remember, this is when Mary gives the statement about her first Leitner to Gertrude, and gives Gertrude Eric Delano's page, which we don't know is Eric Delano's page until season 4, and she takes that page over to some floorboard, picks it up, puts it there, and John's like, I heard that floorboard before, picks it up, finds her laptop and some keys. Like I said in the last video, the laptop was important for season 2. The keys here now, the keys. They talk a little bit about Gertrude and John's powers, and Jerry mentions that his mom, Mary Key, wanted them to be like a mystic dynasty akin to like the Lucases or the Fairchilds. And John asks if he wants to make a statement. And so Gerard Key tells his story of how his mother wanted to become powerful in some way, to have a legacy. She sought out multiple different Leitners and pushed Jerry to follow in her footsteps. She wanted to be like Robert Smirk and his contemporaries, following the dread powers without being taken over by them. And eventually, after tying herself to the catalog of the Trapped Dead, like wrong or right, I forget exactly, Gertrude finally helped Gerard kill her, burning her page, and she took him under her wing. Mary wanted to become she wanted to own the catalog of the Trapped Dead in a way that was metaphysical, and so her writing Sanskrit, some text on her body showing her head, which we saw in for Page Turner. That was her attempt to take control of the catalog. I'm still not 100% sure what she was trying to do, but she either did it very correctly or very incorrectly, because she lingered after that. She had control. So I think it was that she did it correctly, like more correctly than better or whatever. And so she had control of when she could pop in and out of the book and still be more or less invulnerable. And eventually Gertrude burned her page and killed her for good and set Jerry free from all that. John asks Jerry what Gertrude was doing. And he says she was stopping rituals like the Unknowing. And John responds with surprise, asking if there were more, because obviously we did not know that the Great Twisting was a ritual, just that it was a Great Twisting, and the Sunken Sky, and like other rituals that may have been mentioned prior. None of them have been mentioned as rituals themselves. And so John is surprised, and he asks if there are more rituals, and Jerry sort of laughs, surprised that John doesn't know so much. John knows so little. And John says that the I and the others feed on our fear, but Jerry corrects him. No, they don't feed on it. They are it. For the first time in 110 episodes, John finally gets the answers that he needs. He needed to travel half around the world, meeting many dangerous people, read so many statements, to finally be ready to learn the full truth regarding the eldritch powers he's trying to fight. John tries to rationalize that these powers are our fears, that the things that they do don't always cause fear, that fear changes, that fear is cultural, and Jerry nods along and says, yes, it's all conjecture, it's all weird, it's all wrong. He says that Mary and Gertrude followed Smirk's 14. John says that there are more than 14 fears, and Jerry agrees. And in contrast to Leitner's art metaphor, he describes it as colors, which I find more poetic, better than Leitner's. He says how groupings of colors are arbitrary, how two different colors are still considered the same, how it's still considered one color, but at one point, one color is still considered as a different color than the other. John puts it all together and says they are, quote, an infinite amorphous blob of terror bleeding out in every direction at once. Which is so much better of an explanation than what Leitner could do. At this moment, John expresses his need for a cigarette, which like alludes to the moment where he needed a cigarette for Leitner, and when John leaves, Leitner's killed and can't do that anymore. But Jerry says that it cannot wait, and so perhaps this was a moment where the web was trying to pull John away, but he's powerful enough to resist it so that Jerry can tell him a lot more. Because we know that the web lighter he got is making him feel more addicted to smoking. And Jerry elaborates. He recites, Robert Smirk divided the beings into 14 distinct powers, each comprised of a variety of smaller terrors, some direct and practical and some more abstract. And between the both of them, in a very cool meta way, John, voiced by Johnny Sims, author Johnny Sims, creator of this world, and Jerry Key, someone in the story who knows more than John, talk through all 14. And it's a very John is learning this, but the people writing this, the creation of this is finally revealing the amazing sort of the world that they created. And it's so good. It's so amazing. The eye in a spiral, John already knew about, having heard them from Leitner, as well as the end, which was mentioned a handful of times prior. Obviously, the stranger, which he's been working to defeat. John mentions isolation, Gerard names the lonely. John mentions the lightless flame, Gerard names the desolation, which was said by Jude not too long ago. But does the desolation cover war, or is that the end? No, that's a slaughter. John mentions vertigo and falling, Gerard names the vast. John contrasts with claustrophobia, Jerry names the buried. The dark is an easy one, very old. Filth, or insects, and Jerry names the corruption. But not spiders, no, that's the web. John asks about all the meat, and Jerry names the flesh. Sure, it began as an animalistic fear, but the growth of the world has led to the growth as a fear, and the hunt is similar, also animalistic. John asks about the rituals, attempts to bring the respective fear into the world and apocalypse, which Jerry says Gertrude was stopping. The Unknowing and the Watcher's Crown were next on her list. John learns that the eye has a ritual, and he immediately thinks of Eliza's plans. He doesn't know what it is, and neither does Jerry. Eventually, Gerard grows tired, and John takes his page. Gerard tells John to call him Jerry, that he wanted his friends, if he had any friends, to call him Jerry. And he returns to the page. Reeling from this information, John returns to the hunters and prepares to return to the flight home. This episode is monumental. We already had all of this information. Most of the entities were named already by their respective avatars, and some not. The differences were evident. We just needed that little bit of a nudge to really parse it out for everyone, like a revelation. John learned this by himself, and sure, Jerry had to be there to tell him, but like I said prior, it was after a bunch of work that John's done. This is John's reward of true knowledge, of true answers, and he's not happy. He's scared. Fear. an eldritch being hard to conceptualize, split into arbitrary parts with people and monsters running around doing things for these powers, these fears. It's like what Julia says, like a punch to the gut. With the information he needs to know about the unknowing, John returns to London to tell the Institute. A lot has occurred in the last few episodes, and a lot has been learned, and now John and his friends will need to put all they've found together to stop the unknowing.
God, do I miss being chased? That's depressing.
John no longer gets kidnapped. I just wanted to mention that. These next few episodes mark a time of waiting and planning as everyone's pool of knowledge is brought together. John also begins facing what he's turning into, knowing more stuff through his power than before, and it's the calm before the storm. In 112 Thrill of the Chase, John returns to London, and Daisy fetches Basira after she reads Lisa Carmel's statement on the murder club. They have a quick conversation where Daisy says Basira's been too comfortable just reading, not trying to escape, but Basira says she's not working alone and will have Melanie fill her in with her plan, presumably what they begin to discuss at the end of Creature Feature. Basira also notices Daisy's unease and asks, how does it feel like when you make a kill? Basira had just finished reading a statement on The Hunt, and though she didn't know what the taxonomic name for it, she recognizes the through line of predator-prey and has seen it reflected on Daisy. Daisy reflects her questions, telling her to stop trying to psychoanalyze her, and they head off to distract Elias from the request of Melanie and Martin, who went with John to some storage unit for some reason. We see this storage unit in 113 Breathing Room, where the three of them search for anything specific from Gertrude. John finds her notebook, which becomes useful in the next few episodes in season 4 to learn about the rituals. Overall, doesn't really have that much big reveals in this season. Throughout it all, Martin attempts to talk to John about his travels, trying to connect, and John answers, but you can tell he's distracted with trying to find anything. He's also expressing sympathy for what Elias did to Melanie, and he also signs off on the plan that Martin and the rest made, but they still won't tell us the plan, which is very telling, and I will get back to that in a moment. Melanie finds the remains of the destroyed gorilla skin, and Martin finds a block of C4. In the same location as the C4, John discovers a letter which he reads for the statement of Adelard Decker and Justin Go, which at the end of it tells them that Gertrude had acquired the C4 from Adelard himself for the unknowing. This also shows that the multiple things that Gertrude bought in season 2, which were mentioned, like dangerous stuff that she bought online, were to stop the rituals. That finally ties up that little mystery thing there, little mystery wrinkle there. These episodes, to me, are more of a return to form, as John is reading statements that are within the archives and seems to just be filling in blanks of information not immediately pertinent to the unknowing, but still necessary for the future season 4 and 5. Most of the plot beats occur after or before the statements, as the statements themselves take a back seat after the recording. In 114 Cracked Foundations, after John reads the statement of Anya Villette and Hilltop Road, he purposely bumps into Tim, knowing that he would show up here, who's been avoiding everyone in the Institute. They both argue for a bit as John questions what Tim believes is listening to the tapes, and Tim questions his insistence on recording. And Tim learns that John listened to his tape about his brother, and John pleads that they need to work together, again reiterating his need for allies that he started in the beginning of the season. And Tim asks why he just doesn't pull it out of him. And John, again looking for allies, assures him that he's still John. He's not an enemy. And this idea of John's compassion is yeah, I could do that, but I don't want to because that's not good. And Tim doesn't really get that, but he agrees to tell John because at least with John, he knows who he is, and his trust in everyone was completely shattered about learning that Sasha was replaced. And John didn't kind of realize this until now. He's I didn't realize how close you were together, I guess. And Tim says he can't put himself in that position again to trust anyone, in contrast to John, who is putting effort to trust others. And it's a complete reversal from the last season, where John was the one who didn't trust anybody. And in this moment of mutual understanding, Tim tells him where he believes the ritual will take place, in the wax museum that John was kept at. That they no longer need skin, as they took the skins of 2 dead people, Gertrude Robinson, and a George Icarus, which is a small mystery that we come to learn is just Jürgen Leitner. I don't want to like backtrack a lot. It's Jürgen Leitner. They got Gertrude and Jürgen's skin. Now fully, after learning about Danny, Tim is brought into the fold to stop the Unknowing actively. Afterwards, John meets with Daisy in the tunnels to pass off the C4 bombs, and they discuss the plan, both the plans for the Unknowing, which involve the C4, which, like, why would there be a C4? You know why. And the plans for Elias, which are still unknown. Interesting. 114 Crack Foundation was a statement that Martin found that related back to Hilltop Road, a thread that's been nagging at John for a while. And John's getting a varied diet of information just to be well-rounded. In 115 Taking Stock, another nagging thread is Mikhail Salesa, who left a statement for the Institute that John reads now, which no big revelations occur here besides learning that Salesa worked under Leitner for some time, but that bit of information has no use to John now. He says that like this sort of information a few years ago would have been great information, great speculation appearing from that, but now it's just a thing that he knows. He even expresses that the waiting is hard for him, and even questions if he missed being chased because everything's just sort of like quiet now. He's just waiting. As he's doing this sort of contemplation, he gets interrupted by Helen the Distortion, who felt bad about killing a man and wanted to talk with John because Helen Richardson liked speaking to John. But when he berates her, Helen says, "We're both changing archivist. I had hoped that together," but John cuts her off and tells her to leave. Again, John is confronted with his fear of becoming inhuman. And the first few times with Georgie and Tim, they still want to see him as human, which gave him some hope. But Helen here, coming in and telling him his worst fear, makes him angry. She's the only one there who's like, "You're becoming a monster, just accept it. You're becoming a monster with me." And she's not saying it in a way to manipulate him. She's like just saying kind of like fact. In a way, John being chased, John doing investigations, John learning more does equal work, both turning him inhuman and keeping him distracted from that. In season 4, we begin to break apart what it means for John to be human or monster, and we never get a definite answer because it's all very murky. To me, the true monsters are the ones that never began as human, like the Distortion, like Not Sasha. Distortion obviously being the thing before it became Michael, whatever. And John's fear is from his interactions with other avatars like Jude Perry, My Crew, and the Hunters. It's all very muddy waters for John to navigate, and it's not helping that he can only dwell on it while they're waiting for the Unknowing to approach. Like everything he's been learning is just so much, and then he has all this knowledge, he's just sitting waiting for the right moment to act on it. And that drives him crazy. That makes him scared. That makes him think about him turning into a monster.
I want to wear it when I dance the world new.
All of the past episodes this season, from the first stalker statement of Nikola Orsnov in a department store, to the statement of a growing mold that led to learning about Beacon and Hope, from the Officer Sands statement to stave John over as he's traveling, to Jerry's lore dump that described the world as it is, all of these episodes and statements have led to learning about, preparing for, and leading to the Unknowing, the ritual of a stranger, to bring the fear of the unknown, the uncanny, and the hidden to our world, remaking the world into a reality of confusion, masks, and strangers. In 116, The Show Must Go On, Elias gathers everyone in the Institute minus Melanie and Tim, who refuse to interact with Elias. They discussed a plan, which is to place the C4 bombs in the Wax Museum and set them off when the dance begins. They're telling us the plan now. So, in creative writing, if you want to write a heist or like a mission, complex mission to succeed, one that makes sense and is exhilarating and nothing feels too unexpected or boring, you must not tell the audience the plan. When they begin their heist or mission, we are left in the dark as to what is going to happen next, allowing us to be surprised as to what their next step is and can see the proficiency of the characters, making the heist or mission very exciting. The one biggest example I can think of is the Six of Crows story written by Leah Bardugo when they're doing a heist into a prison, and like I forget exactly what they're doing in the heist. I think they're really setting someone free or doing something. They do not tell us what the plan is, so that when the characters do something interesting, it's like, oh, they planned this before. It was really exciting. That is a common advice for heists or missions or anything that needs a complex plan. Now, if you want to write heist or mission to fail, one that makes sense and is tragic, and nothing feels too contrived or obvious, you must tell the audience the plan. When they begin their heist or mission, we know exactly what should happen next, and we will be the first people to know when it goes wrong, and when we expect something to happen but it doesn't, or vice versa, when we don't expect something to happen but something does. It's exciting, exhilarating, as we watch as the characters think on their feet and solve the problems. Hi, Editing David here. I was editing this portion, and in the original cut, I had the only plan that failed, because it was told to us that I could remember, was from Harry Potter, and I don't like J.K. Rowling at all, and so I didn't. I started talking about Harry Potter, but like, let me just replace that over by something else, because now I do have a better example for a story that details like a plan or a mission or a heist that details the entirety of the plan, but it fails. And the biggest example that I have right now is the classic Romeo and Juliet, because Romeo and Juliet attempt to run away with each other, and they plan with other people, and so Juliet's going to drink this tincture that makes others think that she died. Romeo gets there and he finds that she dies, so he takes poison, and then she stabs herself, and from the very beginning we knew what the plan was. And also there's a sense of irony there, and not so much in like the Magnus archives, these two plans I'm talking about right now in terms of irony, but irony is a good tool when you're writing these sort of stories, because you can know something that the characters don't. Say, for example, you know that Juliet isn't asleep, but Romeo doesn't know that, and so that's sort of dramatic irony there. Or let me just give a basic example. If you're in a heist, you know that the object that they are trying to steal is actually no longer there, and so the dramatic irony is that the characters don't know that the thing that they're trying to steal is no longer in that location, but us, the audience, does. So there's a lot of tools for sort of drama and suspense during these moments. There's always a lot of space also for surprise as well, and that's the fun part of like telling out a plan and saying, hey, let's poke some holes in it. Here in this moment, we learn what their mission is, and metatextually, we know that something is going wrong. The C4 explosion should work, but what will go wrong? Alongside that, we still don't know what the mission is that Martin is planning in regards to Elias, so we don't know what he's going to do. How will we know if his plan works? What will be the consequences of it? Having both of these plans laid out like this contrasts them both and makes us excited to see what is going to happen next, because we know the exact what needs to happen for one plan, but the other plan we don't really know what's happening. So both of these happening at the same time makes it really exciting. In this episode, Elias shows them a recording of Gertrude reading the statement of Abraham Jansen and the first attempt of the Unknowing in the Court Theater Buddha. In it, we witness the exact one long category error that happens during the Unknowing, a state of confusion and fear, so that the characters learn what they will be facing. Gertrude's final comments state the requirements for the ritual to have begun before its disruption. Again, a repetition of what we've heard prior, sort of drilling in that we have to start the ritual before ending it. Elias also expresses his hope that his preparations for John have gained him enough power to not be affected by the Unknowing. Again, we see here a small plan explained before us of John and his powers, and obviously John's powerful, so he's not going to be affected by Unknowing. What could go wrong? John suggests Martin shouldn't stay, not needing any more complications, and Martin argues back, wanting to come, but Elias agrees and benches Martin. They also discuss Tim coming with them. Elias says he'll think about it, and he leaves them to prepare, which is when Martin reveals it was all a ruse planned by Martin. Again, so this is sort of like a surprise. Like he he argued against not coming, and then he was benched, and he's like, great, that worked. Here, we are surprised. What is Martin planning? Episode 117 Testament is a slow-paced episode where the characters talk about their thoughts on the mission. John fully describes their plan, which is to sneak in and have Daisy plant the bombs while the others distract. John reiterates his need to trust everyone, except for Elias, of course, and reinforces his need for allies, a sentiment that we will return to in season 4, obviously. He trusts that Martin and Melanie will know what they're doing, and he learns to let go. The other characters have a moment to be able to talk, which is a macrocosm of what their characters' arcs have led to this season. And all of the buildup of their wants and their needs are highlighted here in this episode, and in the moments before they embark on this dangerous mission. Basira, who throughout the entirety of the season has waited and read and learned, having less of an active role in the season than before, but still present, is biding her time. In her testament, she questions how she got into this position, knowing that she followed John and Daisy here, but still asks how she became important enough to save the world. In this moment, she shoulders responsibility, which she will continue to carry into season 4, affecting her relationships further in the future. Basira as a character will grow further and further into a complex character in season 4 as she becomes more angry. And this is the beginning of why she becomes angry. Someone else who's angry, Melanie, who's become more and more angry with the world, with John, with Elias and the Institute, reveals that Martin's plan is to take down Elias, but she still doesn't reveal how they're going to do it. She shares a small amount of her travel to India and how she was shot, but the hospital never found a bullet in her body. But obviously, she feels it. She'll carry this wound into season 4 and ends the statement with, "Good luck, John. I do hope you win, but I also hope it hurts." Melanie's driven by the things that Elias have done to her, and she is not yet sloppy, and she still hasn't fully fallen into the slaughter like power, but she is fueled by her anger, and we see this in her last statement. Martin, who's done so much work this season by his own accord, who wants to help, who's paved his own path, doesn't want to be scared anymore. He expresses his want to be useful and has shown it throughout the season, and he likes what he's been able to do. He toes the line of manipulation, saying, quote, "It felt good leaving my own little web," in regards to his plan. This moment is the one that Animal Kane mentioned, among other moments, where Martin could have gone on the way of the web with his subtle manipulations. This was in season 5 when she talks to him. And in a way, he did manipulate the audience. And this is surprising. But in reality, if we look at what he's done before, it's not surprising. He gets what he wants. He pleads for the others to return, and he wishes to win on his own accord, also beginning to toe the line of the lonely, expressing his want to be alone. And here, he also pleads to John personally to survive, because he cares about him. Daisy barely says anything in her testament. All season, she's been hunting down John, then working for Elias, running around doing things behind the scenes, and she's still being secretive, not sharing her internal thoughts. She's done so much through the power of the hunt. That's all she knows how to do, to be a force of danger. And the only thing that she does is cocks a gun and says, "Okay," and turns off the recorder. Tim, as before, berates the recorder for listening. He reflects on his former interest in Robert Smirk and says he was a fool for trying to find a balance, and from how Tim sees it, the only person to do any damage to the fears was Gertrude. Throughout the show, we get these moments where John looks at the things that Gertrude's done and sees them negatively, because they are, but everyone else, Tim, Basira, Elias, sees the things that she's done as a necessary evil. But John doesn't see it that way. And for me, that's what stops him from becoming a monster. His own sympathy, the sympathy that we see in Georgie, and the sympathy that he has, the compassion that he has for people. Elias's lesson in Nothing Beside Remains is not learned by John, but reflected by Tim's wants. So Tim progresses with anger and a drive to destroy without taking into account his own safety. He says he doesn't expect to come back. And that is the true tragedy with Tim's character, because he started off so good and he's just been beaten down. In the end, John hesitantly burns down Jerry's page, letting him finally rest. It's almost like the eye doesn't want him to destroy it, and it hurts John to burn the page, to let knowledge go, but he does it anyway. Again, this decision stops John from becoming a true monster. His compassion for Jerry. He knew there was more information to gain from Jerry, and he knew that he could just tell him, just keep him, but he felt compassionate enough to kill Jerry and let him rest. And to me, it's very sad that no one else will see this from him. And so when everyone else is coming at him for becoming a monster, they do not see the compassion he has for the people he cares about. Yes, in season 4, he will be taking statements from people unwillingly just to feed himself. And at that point, he's just beaten down so much, but he still has compassion. And that's why he's not yet a monster and doesn't turn into a monster at all throughout the season. Despite what happens in season 5, I don't believe he becomes ever a monster. Sure, an avatar of the eye, yes, but a monster? No. Not with his compassion. Not with how he deals with the people that he cares about. Never a monster. It's gonna start raining soon. The finale arc continues with 118 The Masquerade, where John, Tim, Basira, and Daisy, the Eye Squad, head over to the Wax Museum while Martin and Melanie begin their own plan. We don't know what Martin's been doing when he begins burning statements. Happily, too. Elias appears telling him to stop, but he continues. Elias asks Martin if John made him do this, and Martin is angry at Elias underestimating him. Elias outright mentions Martin's attraction to John, and then imposes into Martin's mind how much his brother dislikes him and other strong emotions that leaves him a wreck. Elias leaves him with a warning, letting Martin cry. Eventually, after he composes himself, Melanie appears with what she was doing, and they leave. It seems that Martin's plan is working. Learning that Elias's gaze is limited means he can be distracted, which Martin has done to allow Melanie to find evidence for the police, which John and Daisy realized could be turned in so Elias could be arrested. Everything's coming together for this plan. We return to the ritual as it increases in power and begins, and a little argument of what to do next traps the Ice Squad within the ritual, unable to escape. So unfortunately, it wasn't my microphone that died, it was my phone that I'm recording on that started to die, so we're gonna be in camera audio, phone audio, which sucks, but I'm almost finished. and sorry for the audio difference. 119 Stranger and Stranger is a crazy episode with many moving parts to it. In different POVs, we have the Eye Squad confronting agents of the Stranger, trying to confuse them, trying to kill them, and trying to thwart them. First, Sarah Baldwin toys with John, saying she's Tim, trying to get him to hand over the detonator that he holds of the bombs, the C4s, that Daisy has planted. It seems that John is not immune to the Unknowing, as his eye powers are failing. Next, Daisy is confronted by Breakin and Hope, and they begin to fight. Then Basira and Tim bump into each other, both confused, and Tim flees from Basira. All of the Ice Squad is in the Unknowing, having this unknowing power acted upon them. Then we return to John. Nicola is toying with John, pretending to be Sasha, and then taking the skin of Gertrude as Sarah takes Leitner's skin, and both of them are berating him for being a failure, using the voices of Sue Sims and Paul Sims as Gertrude and Jurgen, respectively. We also hear Breakin yelling about Daisy killing Hope, and here we get a little confusing moment where Breakin leads Daisy into the coffin, trapping her into the berry, which, shout out to this comment on my season 2 ranking video, that they mentioned there was a parallel between the first statement that we get from Daisy, which was her first time that she got sectioned, which was encountering the buried and seeing her partner Isaac Masters get into the buried, and parallels her getting into the buried coffin this time. So shout out to this commenter. We also hear Basira talking to herself, reasoning stuff out, and closing her eyes and managing to just walk out of the Unknowing unharmed. Finally, John's beginning to come to some sense, seeing and knowing how Joseph Grimaldi came to become Nikola Orsonov, when all of a sudden Tim attacks him, believing him to be an agent of the Stranger. John asks Tim, compels Tim to tell him what he sees, gaining him some clarity. Sure, John began in the thrall of the Unknowing, not having track of his power, but the first power he had, the one he began to fully control this season, to compel, leads to the success of the plan. Again, the characters thinking on their feet, doing stuff that surprises you. We saw what the plan was. We saw what could go wrong, saw the plan failing, and John's quick thinking and the work he's put in leads to the plan succeeding. John asks Tim what he's holding. The detonator. The clarity gives Tim just enough time to say a witty line at Nicola's expense, and he presses it. The bombs go off, the world explodes around them, and the ritual is successfully ended. There's so much buildup, so much work done in this season for John to do the thing he's been doing since the beginning, asking questions. He began the season without fully knowing of his compulsion, eventually growing with it enough so that it could just happen, and this allows for success. And this just is an amazing climax for everything that has occurred.
Hello, John. Apologies for the deception, but I rather wanted to make sure you started reading, so I thought it best not to announce myself.
I so want to talk about season 4. Everything that comes after this season, everything that follows, is the highlights of the show for me. An amazing climax for the show, and there's obviously more to come, but this is what nearly everything has led to. And now, what happens? John's in a coma. He'll be in this coma for many months. A lot is changing for John himself. Okay, I can finish this quickly as I get my microphone out because it started raining! In 120 Eye Contact, we hear Elias giving a statement about John's dreams, and we see a recap of all the live statements John's taken from people, and see how he's grown from them. Elias says, quote, "Heart unbeating, lungs unmoving, but mind and nerves alive and firing wildly. Everything but brain dead." John is dead. But his dreams keep his mind alive, and this is when he transitions from human to avatar. Not a monster, but an avatar, as named by Georgie, who warned him that following this path would lead him here. We know that John will make a decision in his dreams, whether to accept the eye or not, and we know that John will be more powerful when he wakes up. But for now, John is in a coma, resting and waiting, marked by the end. After Elias delivers his statement, Martin comes into the office, and Elias offers his condolences for Tim, who died, and Daisy, who they presume also died. And then a police officer arrives and arrests Elias with the files and tapes Melanie stole from the office while Martin was distracting him. It's revealed now that Martin's plan worked and they successfully arrested Elias. He says he wasn't expecting it from Martin and he simply didn't look into him, underestimating Martin, which is exactly what Martin wanted. In the end, Peter Lucas appears and tells Martin that he'll be taking over the Institute in Elias's absence. He assures Martin's worries, saying that he's just here to do the mundane work of the Institute and that Elias is still the metaphysical head of the Institute. He sends for Basira and Melanie to meet them, and in the end, he says to Martin, "I think we're going to great things, Martin, great things." And I think it's very interesting that he doesn't say we're going to do great things. He says we're going to great things, which I believe is a grammatical quirk in British talk, but also British talk, in British English. But to me, it's also telling that saying going to great things is state of being, not state of action. Because saying we're going to do great things would be we're going to save people, we're going to help people, we're going to whatever. But going to great things is a state of being. And I think that's very interesting that Peter Lucas, of all people, would say that. And the season ends.
Statement ends.
This season is so much. It does so much. So much story is packed into its folds, so much to uncover, and still so much that I didn't mention. Here and there are moments where the tape recorders surprise our characters, as they either didn't realize that they were turned on, they question why it was turned on in the first place, or they turn right back on after being turned off. Those kinds of revelations are for season 4 and 5, so if you want to hear those, check out those videos. I also alluded to them, but didn't really draw attention to the important moments where John gets marked by the fears for Elias's plan. Again, a plan never really shown to us until it comes to fruition. To surprise us, the web, the desolation, the vast, the hunt, and the end, these markings, are in the season. That's 35% of the fears. Again, that's a discussion for season 4. I briefly touched on the rituals mentioned this season, but they were stopped and overshadowed by Gertrude and her story anyways. And I wish I could push for more discussion on John and Martin's relationship, but it doesn't really get a big spotlight here like it does in season 4. just sort of small mentions of how close John and Martin have become. We leave the season off with great changes. Peter as the head of the Institute. Helen is around. Tim and Daisy are gone. Elias is in jail, and John's in a coma. This season had such an amazing ending, an amazing story, and a mystery and stakes. And the characters grow and change for the better and for the worse, mostly for the worse. And it's just amazing the amount of work done here. I enjoy the season for what it allows for in season 4, which is my favorite season. But I must give the flowers to the season for what it accomplishes within its own bounds. There's great character work, great superb world building, terrifying horror. And this is why the show is so good. And we still have 2 seasons after this. And I might return to season 4 and 5 in the future, but for now, capping off the series of retrospective and analysis of season 3 is more than enough. So thank you very much for watching. If you're still here after so long, thank you so much for going on this journey with me. I had so much fun breaking apart every minute detail in the story. I'll continue to make videos on Magnus Protocol as they come out, but I do want to move on to other amazing media that has changed me profoundly. I will also be putting out a ranking video for this season, obviously, so you get my personal feelings about these episodes, not just my analytical ramblings, like what I actually feel about it. Spoiler alert, I hate a flesh pig. Please like and subscribe, comment, share with your friends. I'd love to get a wider audience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Magnus Archives and season 3. Thank you very much. Stay away from evil clowns, pits in the ground, French people who like bugs a little too much, and I'll see you next time.